pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes.
Then we need to adopt tonight's agenda.
I move that we adopt tonight's agenda.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
And approve the minutes for 3/17 and 3/28.
I move that we approve the minutes for March 17th and March 28th.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're down to informational and discussion items. And over to Bill. Mark.
Mr. Ben here?
Yep.
I don't know where you want, I'll just stand right here, is this okay? Good. Well, I'm back. We're kind of at the halfway point of our search, and this has been a quick search for your new superintendent compared to 3 years ago when we were here. Wayne Robertson and myself, Mark Finn, are doing the search for Northwest Leadership Associates. And as you know, you've hired us to help with the search. And so we've, up to this point, we put an online survey out. We've advertised the position in our state, outside of our state, all over the world, actually on the internet. And we also have a brochure and application that we've sent to about 65 people. So there's been some interest. It is, we've talked about this during previous conversations, it is a little late in the recruiting season, mainly because this year in the state of Washington, there are over 70 superintendent openings. In a normal year, you would maybe have 25. Why? A lot of people are getting out, a lot of people are moving, a lot of people are just retiring and doing like I did about 7 years ago. So there are a lot of openings. In fact, after today, I go to SELA and help them with their 3 finalists for their positions. So it has been busy. I think personally, I've done about 8 or 9 searches this year. So, but that being said, I think there is some good interest in the position. I think people see it as a good place to land as a superintendent, and I'd like to go through an agenda with you, but first of all, I'd like to do the report and talk about that. First of all, right now we don't have any applications, but I have commitments, verbal commitments from about 7 people that they say they will apply. So I would, to be conservative, I'd say you're going to have at least 10 applications, and I think the 10 is some pretty quality people in that 10. We had 19 3 years ago, if you remember, those of you that were on the board then. It does. I think a lot of times the number is as important as the quality of the people, and I think the people that have told me they will apply are quality people. So our job is to make your job hard as a board, and when we do the screening and go through that process, I think when you look at the applications, you'll see you have some good candidates. So we've sent out 64 applications, or we've had 64 inquiries. We've sent out 58 applications. Out of those, there's 16 of them are current Washington State superintendents. It's kind of late in the year to get a superintendent to apply to leave their district at this time. There are some interested, but for them to leave in May, which is when this kind of closes up, it's pretty late because it's really hard to find a replacement. So to have 16 from our state is pretty impressive. Out of state, we have 8 current superintendents from Oregon, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, and Michigan. Former superintendents and directors, we have 4 a couple from Washington, a couple from Oregon. Current Washington State Assistant Superintendents or Directors, there's 14 that are Assistant Supes, Directors, that sort of position. Most of those obviously are in bigger districts. And about half and half from the west side, half from the east side. Current out-of-state Assistant Superintendents are 7, California, Idaho, Oregon, Arizona, and Iowa, that we've sent applications to. There are 12 principals that have received applications from Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Out of the 64, 17 are female, 47 are male, 10 of them have their doctorate degree, and 2 of them are minorities, will be classified as minorities. So, and like I said before, we've had the online survey here going on for how long, about a month. We've had a really good response. I really appreciate 127 responses right now to that. I would suggest, and we would suggest, that you do one last push, because the survey, we schedule it to close on Friday, this coming Friday. So we need to get one last word out. The principals maybe can get on your reader boards or newsletter. Maybe we can get something out through Facebook, through either lines of communication and that, so we can get one last push. So this time next week, you'll have that report, school board, you'll have the report. And we basically ask you to read it, but usually the board gets the most out of reading the comments. There'll be a numerical breakdown for each category, but the comments are what we suggest. You're going to take time to read the comments. And it's going to be a pretty thick document, if you remember right from last time. But that's part of the input that you wanted and the transparency you wanted. So, I mean, if we can get up to 140, 150, that's awesome. That really is awesome for a district this size. So, you've had good feedback. People have taken advantage of that, and I think it's good. So the position closes a week from Friday on the 22nd of April. And up until then, if we have, are we flexible? Yeah, we are kind of. The applications we get, they're kind of like, we're in a middle school, so I'd say they're kind of like middle school students. They wait till the last minute to turn in their assignments. And applications usually come in late. So we're going to see a flurry of applications right at the end. Now, if somebody calls Wayne or I on Friday and says, I'm going to get my stuff in, and can I still turn my stuff in if I get it in by Monday? We're going to say yes. And then probably Monday or Tuesday of that next week, you'll have the applications, I'll be sending them to you guys to take a look at, and those are all confidential, but you'll have a chance to look at those before we do our screening. The screening meeting's on the 29th, so remember we were going to do that at 8 o'clock in the morning. Claire is going to come back and be with us from Joanne, if I remember right?
Yes.
And so at 8 o'clock in the morning, Wayne and I will both be here for that. And so we'll present the candidates to you. If you remember, we have an A list, a B list, and a C list. Those are only recommendations. You're making the decision as a board who you want to bring forward as a finalist. We have talked about doing May 16th, 17th, and 18th for finalists. I wouldn't rule out maybe adding, kind of like we did 3 years ago, maybe another day. So don't totally take that off the table. I just, if the people that I think are going to apply, we may want to interview 4. You may want to bring 4 in, like you did the previous time. So, but we'll talk about that when we do the screening. So the finals and I gave you a schedule from what we did 3 years ago, and that worked really well, and hopefully that'll help. But the final interviews right now are 16th, 17th, and 18th of May, and that's in person. We're planning on doing everything in person. And throughout the day, they'll meet with the community, they'll meet with the principals, they'll meet with staff, they'll meet with classified people, get a tour of the district, and it'll be an opportunity for them to get a flavor of Cleon Roslyn, but also responsible for everybody that meets them to give some input to you as a board. So if you remember, we go through each day, we read the comments at the end of the day, and then we go through that for 3 or 4 days. So after that's done, after the meetings with the staff, and there's a dinner with you as a board, you remember that there's a dinner, and we invite the spouse if they can be there, if they have a spouse. That's an executive session. And then after the community meeting, after the final community meeting each day, there's an executive session where the board does a final interview. And remember that you can pretty much ask what you want, or you can have set questions, but it's usually pretty open-ended. And so the final interview questions are, we can help you with those if you want to have formal ones, or it's just, I was wondering sort of thing. I watched in the community meeting, you mentioned this, or it says this in your application, sort of thing. So it's up to you how you want to do that. And we'll talk about that when we do the screening on the 29th. So the contract, Wayne and I have both taken a look at your contract. It looks okay. I don't know if your salary is real competitive to bring people from the west side here. It's what you're going to get is people coming here mainly east side, which is fine. But it is an increase in salary from what Michelle made, which is what we showed you, we asked you to do, which you guys came through on. So it's going to be fair, it's going to be fun. But there'll be people on the west side as assistant superintendents and high school principals and middle school principals that are making more than that, which is the reality. That's just the reality. There's a lot higher pay that costs more on the west side. So I really would like you to have a discussion though around this. I used to call IPD, I used to call COLA, cost of living allowance. The state is providing 5.5% cost of living allowance this year for the administrators, for just as a group, for the teachers, for the classified employees. I would ask you to include that in somewhere in the contract, and so the superintendent receives the same as elementary employees do. I think it's only fair. We think it's only fair, but it's up to you, and you can have that discussion later on if you want what that is. Just one way maybe you could save money in your contract is most districts are giving a travel allowance, and rather than each time a superintendent travels to the SD in Yakima, they keep track of their allowance. They're giving an allowance of $200, $300 a month. And I think that would be a savings to the district in many ways. In one way is the dollars, but in other ways the amount of time it takes people to process that, going through it every time. So a travel allowance is nothing hidden about it. It's just you're going to give them a few $100s a month, and there's no reimbursement for any mileage. If they have to go to Seattle or whatever, you're not paying all that back. And you actually, I think the district will save time and money by doing that. So maybe something to consider. If you use this contract language, I'm not going to copy out, but it's just probably the way you can save money. I feel like tanker my pickup the other day, it was over $100, so it doesn't take long to add up anymore for that sort of thing. So the contract, what we'll do is hopefully have that solidified by the time we meet with have the candidates come in for the final interviews, and then Wayne and I will sit down and go over that with them. So the contract's all taken care of. We're not going to do any last minute haggling or any last minute negotiations. The contract will be taken care of. And it'll be a contract that you come to consensus on and then formally vote on at the next board meeting after you choose your candidate. So the selection announcement will be the last day. There'll be right now it's the 18th. There'll be an open public meeting after your final executive session. You'll make the announcement. So somewhere around that time, the 19th, 18th, 19th, you'll have a new superintendent. And the next board meeting you have, you'll approve the contract, and then this new person comes in. Logistics, just a couple things, just to remember, if they have to come and stay, be lodged close by, because we've got people from all over. The district helps out with that, does that. reimbursing that. So, that's the mid-search report. I wouldn't be concerned right now. I'll give you an example. We just finished a school district, Ferndale, in Northwest Washington. At this point, and they did a long search, long term of time. At this point, they had one applicant. They ended up with 15. So it's not indicative of that you won't have many applicants. We really think you will have some, and some good ones. Quality, maybe not as quantity as many as we had last time, but quality, and you'll be able to make a tough decision. And it's all consensus, remember, until you do the final vote when you come out in open public meeting and you vote for what's called a roll call vote for your new superintendent. Okay, any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, it's gone well so far, and it's we expect it to continue to go well. When we come over, Wayne and I may need lodging too, so we'll get some of that show. Okay, well, it's good to see a good turnout tonight. This is good. This is good.
Mark, are you able to share a copy of the brochure that was created for that position? I have, just.
You haven't seen it?
No.
Oh,
Just the draft one, not the one.
okay, so you have that? Okay, I'll send it to Michelle. She'll just tell me again. So yeah, that's what we can send it all the candidates and as well. Have you seen the application too, Cliff? Okay, you need to see both.
I sent the brochure and the application. I'll resend it, but I don't know.
Because the application and brochure go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And where they-
Yeah.
Was it part of your?
It says the challenges and opportunities. That's the stuff that came up when we drafted that.
Because they have a writing section, remember, and they address that part of the brochure.
That was your course.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That'll help you when you read the applications too. For that. Okay, well, thank you, and remember the online survey closes Friday. The position closes a week from Friday. On Friday, Wayne and I will be sending out reminders to the candidates, reminding them that, we've got a week to go to get your paperwork in. And it kind of early. I know you took spring break last week, but the West Side schools are taking spring break this week, so sometimes you're going to get people in prod to get out and see forward a little bit. So, okay? Okay, see you in a short period of time. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I'm excited tonight to introduce some people that you have seen remotely, maybe, but not in person. So I'll start with the first introduction. Lou. Hello.
He was taking a snooze real quick.
Sorry. So this is Allie and Blue, and you met Blue virtually when we introduced Allie and our therapy dog. So
I can walk him around.
I'll introduce you, and then we'll launch into our presentation. How's it going, Blue?
It's going really good. We have a little presentation for you guys tonight on some SEL that Mr. Dan and Rita are going to present with you. But Blue is a massive part of our SEL program at the elementary school, and he already has been such a big success. I can't begin to explain how helpful he has been for so many students. Just to say, kids come to school and they're like, Blue's my dog, because they might not have one at home, or they'll say, I'm coming to school today because Blue's here. Is it Wednesday? Because if it's not a Wednesday, I'm going back home. So he has been very beneficial for us. Yes, he's very calm, very mellow. He handles most every situation like it's nothing. There's a fire drill and he's just like, okay, this is cool. So he's awesome. He's amazing, and I'm so thankful that you guys have allowed me the opportunity to bring him and train him for our students. So thank you for that. He
So if you haven't been to the elementary, I know Gard and Susan are at the elementary and primary as their schools you've adopted, but I would invite you in to see Lou's bulletin board. He has his own bulletin board. He's writing notes and letters and cards, and see his own little backup that kids go to. And I would argue that it's not just for the students, it's for the adults. He's calmed me down once or twice. So maybe we should just bring it to all of our board meetings too. So I want to introduce you to Allie and David and Rita, who are here to talk about a pilot program for social emotional learning, which is something that we have been deeply invested in our time, our professional development, and support. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Perfect. Evening, thank you. So yeah, today we're going to present a little bit about social emotional learning in the elementary school, and then talk about a curriculum called Purposeful People, which is, if you're familiar with Character Strong, it's what's being used in the middle school and high school right now. Purposeful People is Character Strong's elementary curriculum. So first, what's the importance and the standards of social emotional learning? And the big importance of it, especially right now coming out of the pandemic, we really need to focus on making sure our students are happy and in school, and also learning about like their emotions and how to regulate their emotions. And all of that research shows is very helpful for students' academic growth, as well as just in and out of school. It's helpful all around. Also, Washington State adopted standards in 2020, in January of 2020, and it's been a big focus statewide for SEL, also a big focus of our district this year. And I can pass this around too. So this is like called the one pager of the SEL standards in Washington. There's 6 different standards. 3 of them are focused on self and 3 of them are focused on social skills. Each standard is a progression from early elementary all the way up to K-12. And then there's different benchmarks underneath each standard. So not only is it important that we have social emotional learning in our schools, but it's also required by the state that we teach in, which our teachers are doing a very good job right now. We have SEL, embedded K, TK, preschool 5 actually. But moving forward, looking at a curriculum that would be a tier 1 for all students at the school. All right.
So we have a lot of things in place. I'm sure you guys have heard, of course, about Blue, and we do have some other things. And hearing that there are standards, of course, we do have things we already use. However, what else can we add? So right now, I'm just going to explain in a very brief explanation. Tier 1 is that bottom of the triangle, that green spot, and that's where the majority of our kids lie, where they're really successful without any extra intervention from another space or another adult or another different curriculum. And this is where we want to strengthen our curriculum so we have a really solid foundation. It's kind of like building a Jenga tower. You have to have the base. You start pulling out the pieces, and if it doesn't have anything to lie on, it kind of falls over. Then you have tier 2. This is where I kind of start to dabble in, as well as Margot. She's our school counselor, and she is phenomenal, you guys. She's incredible with our kids. Tier 2 is that yellow spot, and that's kind of where it's like, well, they might need a little extra help. Maybe a little extra group with some friends. Maybe they might see some of our title specialists to help support them. And we already do this in academics. So we really want to make sure we're not only addressing just the academic part of the child. It's the whole child that involves much more than academics. And then there's tier 3. That is the red piece in the triangle at the top. And that should be our smallest population. And this is usually the kiddos who come to see me weekly for that social emotional learning. And that's where there's some really intense instruction. But for today, we really want to look at that tier 1, well, how are we going to strengthen our foundation? So already in our schools, we have Chelsea's choices. I'm not sure if you guys have heard me say Little Frog. He has all these different, what do I do when types of things. We also have bullying prevention. Margot runs that as well. She's amazing at that. Zones of regulation is something that I've been using at tier 3, but we have used it at tier 2, a little bit at tier 1, but it's really designed for an intensive instruction. It's all about identifying emotions. And of course we have Blue. He is not a curriculum, but I like to think he is on his own sometimes, just because he is his own entity that has been an incredible addition to our school. And then we have social thinking. That is something that I use at tier 3 level, again, really, really intense direct instruction. Not necessarily appropriate for every single kid to access, right? They might not need super, super intense instruction to get some of these concepts. And then we also have slumberkins, and they are incredible for our little peanuts. I don't know if you've seen them with their little stuffed animals with books, and they cover a plethora of things, but ideally what we would like to do is just make sure we have our foundation and then add these as we see fit, as our students need them, not using them as our foundation. So as we know, it's a great start. We have a lot of things in place, we have a lot of things going on, a lot of support from all areas of our school. But is it really cohesive? Is it something that's going to, across our schools, from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade, is it going to flow and make sense for our kids?
All right, so moving forward, we have to move backwards. So on November 1st of this year, we had the opportunity to have a man come from Character Strong and do a district-wide staff training. And it was probably, in my 28 years of being a district member, one of my most treasured days of professional development. We were engaged, we were dialoguing, the pressure was off, but there was it was a little nibble of actually what the kids will experience. So we got to see it as teachers and then get to see what the program looked like for kids. So during December and January, I had some time to explore it while I was home for a while. And I would get on every webinar I could, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great stuff, this is great stuff. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? We need to go, we need to go. And I talked with Ellie, and I'm like, Ellie, you watch this webinar. So the great thing about Purposeful People is that it was created by teachers and school counselors for teachers and school counselors. It's aligned already to the state standards, and they're actually coming out with the revised edition to the 2020 standards at the end of June. So it focuses on character development. So tenets like courage, perseverance, honesty, respect, gratitude, kindness, responsibility, cooperation, creativity, and empathy. Those are the lessons for the entire year. They can be standalone, or as a building, we can decide this month we're all going to focus on empathy. Like start our year with empathy. Kids can earn gotchas for showing empathy after they've had practice with the lessons and the teachers see them actually exhibiting the behaviors that are desired. So I'm excited because it feels like a conspiracy theory. They're going to have it in TK, K, music, PE, lunchroom. Everybody's in on it to build our kids up, to feel better about who they are as individuals, but also part of a bigger group. It's a holistic approach, so classroom staff, families, playground included, but we can also send out the lessons to families and share virtually. So let's say we had a snow day, but it was our day for SEL in the classroom. We can either do all at once and start out the week and front load 35 minutes, or we can do 5 minutes a day, mini lessons. But we can share those with families, so nothing is lost. With the ability to go virtual with this is just really impactful, but I think it's also important because it shares with families that we are their partner in their whole child. Like Ali said, we're not just concerned about the academic. We want their hearts and their minds and their bodies to be settled. Because when we can build relationships, we can make a bigger impact on our community as a whole. And as others have mentioned, it's prequel to Character Strong in middle school and high school. So we're always looking for that consistent language, right? There's no hidden agenda. There's no guessing game of the language that's expected from TK or even preschool TK, all the way to 12th grade. So that and for teachers, there's that cohesiveness of language. And we get to work together as teams to decide what are we going to focus on this year and roll up or extract or add to. So it's just an amazing program for all of us. So like I mentioned, it has monthly character traits and themes, changes each month, and our team has already said we're going to tie those gotchas in at the elementary school to it. So, or maybe put things up on the walls. I mean, it's just going to be flooded. We're going to flood our building with positivity, and that's what I love about this is it's so positive, it's fun and engaging. Not that Kelso wasn't, but Kelso was good for conflict resolution, but this focuses on much more than just that. The lessons are simple and clear, they're pre-planned, they're via video, so we can project them in our classrooms on our big screens and talk about it and play the games and be interactive. And I love the fact that kids get to see us play with them and dialogue. Assessment, and like Ally mentioned, this is like there's different components of purposeful people, but it has a universal screener for all students for that tier 1. But when we can explore it further, we will be able to explore their tier 2 and tier 3 systems that they have, and the research that goes into those, which, you know, we have done a great job of finding that information out on our own, but when it comes put together already, it reduces our anxiety and stress as well. So I just find that incredibly amazing. And then the grade level lessons, and we can change them yearly to avoid teaching the same lesson so we don't get bored. But again, it's that dialogue, it's building trust also. I watched their whole Thailand Summit today, and John, one of the creators, starts with the teacher, because he says that's who's the driver of this. And we've got to work on the teacher's own social emotional learning before we can set them up to work on the kids. So I'm just really excited, and I hope that you allow us this opportunity to roll.
All right, so lastly, kind of some logistics of piloting the curriculum. So we've already had a lot of teachers commit to summer professional development and committing to really diving into this work next year. Ashley Master of second grade, Kelly Cole, Heather Beadle, who's over right there, Allie Gray, Rita, Margot, as well as I've gotten some other teachers that have really put some interest in piloting it as well. We're also going to try to connect with the middle school, at least 1 or 2 middle school teachers, so from going 5th into 6th grade, we continue that rolling out. All those teachers listed up there are committed to summer dates. The dates are still to be determined because when I was looking into this, there was only virtual training available. Just last week, they came out and said, okay, we're going to start doing 2-day in-person trainings that were coming up August 21st, 22nd in Tacoma, as well as they're still going to be offering those virtual conferences, so we'll just figure out what works best for us. Purpose People curriculum itself is $2,500, you can see, but if we actually went into adopting this, it's just a one-time fee for the year of $2,500, and then every year renewal after that is $800 a year. So there's some options for the professional development, but then as we're going through, we already have a committee that's formed for this curriculum, so the people that are going to be piloting it, and then we also have a community member coming in, and we're going to be looking at monthly, okay, how's this working, how's this working building-wide, and talking about input from the staff that's just dabbling in it, as well as input from the staff that's really diving in it. Then on top of that, we plan on using the student data that the curriculum has to see it to really have an effect on students. And then Allie left us with a little quote.
As usual. Educating the mind without educating the heart isn't education at all. And like I talked about before, there's so much more to kids than just academics. We can't look at just one piece of a child. There's so much more to them than that piece. So.
Do you have any questions, folks?
That looks great, thank you.
Would this be starting to be implemented in the fall?
In the fall, yes. Yeah, so end of June is when they plan on having this curriculum completely revamped. So they've had it before, and then they stopped, pulled everything back, took the advice from teachers, counselors, and then completely revamped the program. So it's a brand new curriculum that's coming out.
Do you know yet what you're going to be looking for improvements in students, or what kind of the benchmarks are for how well it's working?
So first thing we'll look at is the social emotional screeners and the different data points that they have built into the curriculum, especially in year 1, because in year 1 we wouldn't really probably see an effect necessarily academically. It could be something we look into, but it mainly would be the social emotional standards.
How long would your pilot go for?
It would last a year. So throughout the year, we get together with the committee and then come back to the board to talk about how it's progressing next year.
Mr. May I add, we have created a staff survey.
Yes, we have those results back.
We just don't have all of them, but, you know, we want to see, what do people know about the standards, first of all, right? Because you always have to start with the standards first. Your curriculum is attitude, because your standards are the curriculum. But it'll be interesting to hear what people say, what they've been trying in their own classrooms and doing. This removes all of that other work, right? And it's, like we said, it's cohesive and it's collective work. And it's also like literature. There's classroom titles, books that are very familiar with every grade level. I've checked that they're appropriate with the with any like readability level for grade level. So the books are additional, but we might already have some of the books in our classrooms, and the kids are familiar with them. They maybe just didn't know the message behind them, or had that lens.
Rita, for this pilot program, how long would it take, do you think, to get the whole staff to buy into this and get everybody up to speed?
Gar, I'm glad you asked that, because today I was on the website and looking at some of their upcoming webinars, and I love the fact that they're completely transparent, and they say how to get by, avoiding the pitfalls of lack of fidelity to the program. So I mentioned in our meeting today, we really need to explore those webinars too, because the most preventative and proactive we can be and realistic, the better off we'll be. But I've said this for years with any curriculum, any PD we've done, if it's teacher directed, it's teacher respected. So I hope that when they see how excited the piloters are, it's going to be contagious.
I think there's more access to this one as well.
Yeah.
When you go on their YouTube, I mean, you can look at the trainings right now. Anybody can. And not the superintendent's ones, but it allows teachers, as they feel comfortable, you know what, I kind of want to test the waters and look into that. They can. They don't have to sign up and go somewhere for a training. They don't have to wait for the next day. They don't have to wait until, oh, well, this group's going to go then. They can go look on their YouTube channel now and look through a bunch of them. And I know there are some teachers like, where did you find that again? How can you know, I've already gotten a couple of questions about it. And I think the curriculum itself, the people who made it, being so open, honest, and available to teachers makes it so clear. There's no like, oh, you can't see this until you buy it. You know, it's very out there. And I myself, who solely focuses on social emotional all day, have really enjoyed how easy it is to access extra trainings. What else can I learn? What other lens can I look at it through? So,
Gar, one of the features I love as a teacher is they have a weekly podcast for educators that isn't about really what's going on in your classroom, but what's going on inside of the teacher as a person. So, you know, it's just, not only do they look at the whole child, they're looking at the whole educator as well. And any school board member, anybody in the public even, can sign up, get a free account, and play with some of their staff and have access. So that's what I love too. It's not like Allie mentioned, you have to buy this before we give it to you. It's no, this is a gift. Your free account is your gift, and you can explore our products and services.
That meant if we got it to, the whole staff would have access to it. It wouldn't just be those that are hired. Everyone would have access to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of things you'll hear, and David talked a little bit about it, but when we think about piloting, we've done a couple things prior to pilot, so we call it the dip, dabble, deliberate. And so the dip was this year where we had a speaker come in from Character Strong. We had the secondary, middle school, high school have their training because they've been Character Strong, but we didn't really have a good program that was universal, cohesive, and with fidelity at the elementary. We had little pieces and components of it, and that's what Allie was talking about. So the dip was this year, everyone had the sandbox, they had the launch with the elementary, that's what Rita was talking about, a login and access, as well as free materials. And so with everybody just dipping their toe into the water a little bit for the pilot, this pilot will allow the second year to be more of a deliberate dabble. And then the next one is, if that works, we get feedback from families, students, and staff using the curriculum, then it becomes deliberate when we go on our adoption. So that's how we always think about any adoption. When we think about curriculum adopting, is always a dip, dabble, and deliberate. Usually it's a 3-year process. So, well done. Nice job. Okay. So David, Rita, and Allie talked a little bit tonight, and Margot, she's not here tonight, but she did a lot of work on this as well. She is our phenomenal new hire elementary counselor doing a bang-up job. So the team has been working on this pilot, but you also saw a visual diagram today of the pyramid of intervention. So we think about tier 1, 2, and 3. So all, some, very few. And you think about the academic side and the social emotional side. So we looked at data in our last work study session. So we're going to do another dive into our work study session, and we're looking at highly capable and English language learners. So you'll start to see some of the tier 1, 2, 3 language be repeated. So you'll be able to start digging into some of that work. not so much data heavy, as well as program overview, what we're doing well, and where we've got a lot of growth to do in both of those programs with that we can go and build up. So that will be the segue into our next portion of the work study. So like with work study sessions, we want the board to get up and engaged and dig into some of the information to become an active participant in the learning process to help us get better at what we're doing and where we have some blind spots in our work. So Gar, can we turn it over to our next presenter?
I was slightly confused, I guess, on the agenda. So I have capable ELL under information discussion, but then I also have them under program and building report. So, sorry, I think it's up
It's
5A,
okay.
5B.
That's okay. We're learning together. That's the big britches here with board agenda. So we're going to dig in, if you're okay with that, to just continue with the work study session. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and there's Laura up front, and they're going to give you some directions to dig into the work. Okay?
So Matt and I both have overviews for you for program. HiCap is in this little space. ELL's over in this little space. Part of this part is us digging in and working with the school board, but you're welcome to look at information with us too, if you like. But this is an opportunity for school board to ask questions and dig in. So it is, I believe, limited to school board questioning. Is that correct or am I not?
Well, with the work study, we really want to dig in instead of a stand and deliver presentation.
Right.
We really want the board to be able to dig into the information and make sense of it.
And see if it makes sense. If it doesn't, then ask us what the acronyms mean. We start going. So, like for instance, in ELL, they've changed the program about every 2 to 3 years right now. And we just got new standards. We're now on what's called the VETA standards, which is more of a national program. We were on our own state standards prior to that. And now we're more on national standards for English language learners. But part of that change also is a name change to multilingual students. So they are multi-language learners. And that's just more of an asset-based, rather than saying English is a second language. You can see it as a deficit, it's more asset-based. But it also comes with new standards and new progressions of what it means to be proficient in English. But what I love about it is that we're all English language learners. So if you decide to become an airplane pilot tomorrow, you learn all the vocabulary. Or if you decide to become a vet or a car mechanic or a teacher, you would learn all new vocabulary that we're not using currently if you're not in those professions. So it puts everyone on that continuum, not just ELL students or multilingual students. So we're looking at some of those progressions, and Matt and I worked together on some of the things that, hey, we could have done better on, so that's our starting point, and then where we're at and some of our goals moving forward. So that's where we're starting tonight, and we have placard boards for you. Mr. Chase, was there anything else you wanted to add to that? Okay, so we don't need to make you feel uninvited. Marcel Rowley is a brand new hire. That was one of our #1 things, is saying if we could get stabilized staff to continue to help us. So she is helping us with ELL and HiCap, as well as teaching English, and has 2 art classes. So she has a very full plate, multiple hats, and has been learning a lot. Just for ELL, or I've had a hard time transitioning to the language. For our multi-language learner program, she has had over 60 hours of training since August when she was hired. And so, and that included actually 40 hours of that was lab training. So, and then she had over 40 hours of training for the new WIDA screener test and the overall test. And she gets to do more training for the gifted training testing as well. So she's been doing a lot of learning. So as she continues in this program, she'll start to build her expertise and be able to lend that expertise to the entire district. So we're excited.
So we're going to set a timer.
Yes, we will. Let's do
so
it.
we'll do 10 minutes for each session, each group.
And Michelle's going to bounce around, and she's going to answer questions and talk about some of the things that she's learned too. So if you have any questions for Michelle, she's going to be with us as well.
So half the board here and the other half where?
Matt put his
Oh,
boards
I see.
up in the smaller room. And
Oh, I
we'll
see.
go-
Oh, okay. So
Okay, we're going to go to 2 different locations. So I'll make half of you captain with me, and then I'll switch you with Mr. Chase. Thank you. Do you want to go there and the 3 of us will go here and then I'll switch? Back and back.
Thank you, Matt and Laura, thanks very much. So, did she for the covered play?
Yeah, so we met with Tom over spring break, and we have put out, it will be in the Tribune and the Wenatchee newspaper. So we'll do a closed bid May 12th as the closed bid for the covered play area. So that will be advertised, and we'll look at some good bids by 12 at 2 o'clock to the city office.
What's the goal as far as when you want to have it done by, or is that part of it?
That's part of the bid process.
Great.
Before the rain comes? The goal would be to have it, yeah, so school starts, and we should have it the next grand opening for kids and staff, especially our paraeducators.
So there's a final design, right?
Yeah, it was a draft one that we had. Yeah.
But not enough to.
The ball walls just switched from the north to south, because it was on an off.
And everybody where they live 2,400 square foot.
I wasn't, but it says the scope of work on there. But that seems to fit.
So one of our policies is, it's the second read for service animals.
This is the procedure part of it.
It's the procedure.
It'll be approved policy of the right business. Whatever it is.
And then I go through all of them. Sure.
Do you want to do one at a time and take action on them, or for discussion?
It's up to the board.
It's complex, for sure.
Yes.
Covers the things we put in policy, so.
Yes.
Well, should we just approve it one at a time, so the next one is a switch discussion?
Yeah, the next one is first. So I move that we approve 2830P, the service animals and school procedure.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Okay, the next one is pretty lengthy. What we tried to do was, Jen and I talked a little bit about doing strikeouts and adding new words to the old language and new. But I've got to say, the curriculum adoption and instruction WASDA policy, ours is pretty old. And so there's not a whole lot of striking out unless you're striking out the entire document. So what I put here was the first read on both of those so that you can see the policy and procedure. Some things I want to point out is we were redundant in a lot of our language. We just kept adding the board will. So the WASDA policy clearly states it at the very beginning that you can see in that policy. Not a lot of huge changes. Equity, of course, is one of the things that you have to look at. And similar to tonight, you're looking at how to capability, you're looking at special ed, you're looking at social emotional learning, and you're thinking about adapting material, you're thinking about our multi-language learners. So you're thinking about all of those things, which now WASDA has more clearly spelled out in the curriculum adoption policies and procedures. So I didn't strike everything out like I said, but I put it here for you to read. There's not a whole lot other than just shifting the language. However, the procedure that I do want to point out is our old procedure. I'll just kind of, I don't know if you remember it, and we were going to do it side by side, but it was pretty daunting and it's very outdated. So a lot of the hyperlinks don't work at all. So so this was our old one, and everything's hyperlinked, and the links,
That's what I found.
they haven't been there in years since I got here. And then this is the old policy, so I'll just show you so you can see how even the flow chart is out of date, because as you know, curriculum doesn't work that way. It may not be that one, it might be an ongoing goal. And so that is reflected in our change. The other one I wanted to show you is we no longer use film strips and CD-ROMs, really. So in our presentation of a lot of our materials now, you heard tonight earlier with our social emotional, purposeful people, a lot of the stuff is online resources now, so the whole adoption process has to really look to reflect the needs of the newest technology. The other thing that you'll see in here is that we have an evaluation of our materials. So for example, when we do, it's the law, yes, already in our policy where we do a committee with people that are engaged in the process. You heard me say earlier something about, teachers are part of the curriculum process, right? When Gar asked the question about fidelity and adopting everyone in that process, that's why the process involves parents and students. And as students are hit, you probably don't want to have high school students sit at purposeful people at an elementary or pre-K curriculum, but as needed. And so you have a committee that needs and looks at the adoption, has input on the adoption anytime you do a curriculum adoption, and you have to vet it out through the technology department. So if there's a software or there's ancillary material or there's an ongoing cost every year for material similar to our Go Map, part of that was consumables, which is at a high expense. So you really need to be thinking about in your curriculum adoption to the whole process, and what is your consumable every year that you have to allocate funding for. So I took the WASDA language and really looked at the WASDA language in here for the first read that you can see. So you can see the policy and procedure side by side. The other change in here, just to point it out, and happy to have a conversation in the new one on the second page, you can see the roles and responsibilities of the selection and adoption of instructional materials. So there's a standing committee, it's called the Instructional Materials Committee by law. That is a standing committee that just meets and looks at that making the final recommendation to the board, but the board has the ultimate say in all adoption of curriculum. So we just put in here the flow chart is a little bit easier to understand. So certificated teaching staff will identify core material or alternative, or when we look at alternative core, that's your intervention pieces. So right now, when you think about professional learning communities on Fridays, teachers are unpacking standards and identifying standards. And I asked about tier 1, 2, 3 in particular, because when you think about your academic tier 1, all teachers, it's not a choice, everyone's adopt, that's the curriculum all teachers use for that standard. And then you look at a subcommittee to look at the interventions for your tier 2 and then your tier 3. So that's all reflected in this language, and it's aligned with WASDA's policy.
Does WASDA give recommendations on how often we should be looking at adopting new curriculum, or kind of timing of how frequently we're reviewing?
That's a great question, Jen, because if you look here, and then I think I showed at our retreat the document that I pulled up for some of our curriculum that's
We haven't adopted
it's at 30, 25 years, right? And that's that holding budget aside and really building a pot of money every year when you have money that you can draw from and not spending it down. So setting aside, when we reserving it for curriculum adoption so that you can have, like you're talking about, Jen, is that rotating material, right? So you don't have to wait 25 years to get new resources for math in 25 years or 3 years. I know the policy that we have, our old policy here, it looked like there was one and then it kind of just stopped. And so right now the language is every 3 to 5 years. You should be touching it, but not a full-on adoption. What happens sometimes when you put on a full-on adoption cycle is that it's more seen as you got to spend the money instead of thinking about just looking at where are you with your standards, where are you with your data. Are you looking, does your data match the money that you're spending in your curriculum adoption, right? So, for example, do you adopt a math curriculum and 5 years later because you have a rotating cycle, you adopt a new one? Because then we would never see that 7-year gap close, right? What we looked at tonight and updated, we would never see that because you're not doing fidelity for a long 16-shaded period of time.
Do you feel like there's a way to build into this policy? 'Cause I know one thing we've talked about looking at all of the different curriculum we have is that, from one grade level to the next, kids can have a different experience.
Yes.
Is there any way to build in consistency through their experience? Or how can we address that? Or is that something that we just have to hold as a value? I mean, I'm not sure how to...
I think what I hear you asking is there merit in having a cycle of some kind?
Or some sort of consistency so that kids are not having to change modalities from year to year, if that makes sense. Or like different curriculums teach things in different ways. And so is it worth saying that we should try to have it at least build off the last one in a more cohesive way versus like entirely changing it, I think reading was the example that we were talking about.
Right.
Because it's like, not everyone's teaching well, but if you're transitioning to a different type of curriculum every year, is that something that is becoming more of a challenge for kids? I mean, I don't know if that's...
Yeah, that makes total sense. Because...
abilities from districts.
Yeah, well,
abilities
at school. Yeah. So the kids are not, and maybe that's not an issue, but I feel like I know looking at the curriculum that we had, it seemed like it was very, very varied. And of course, teachers, you want them to be able to teach, have their own control and options as well. But I don't know if that's something we build into the policy or not. I don't know.
I think to answer the question from my limited knowledge of only 3 years is that I don't know if there was fidelity with following a process to begin with, because when you do a math curriculum, let's use math for example, when you look at adopting a math curriculum, and let's say it's the 3rd grade teachers that come in and say we want a new math curriculum, you would never just adopt for 3rd grade. You would look at all of preschool, TK, K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you would look at your middle school program.
So primary.
So I'm not sure, 15 years, like who's the midpoint right now. The books are very, very old, right? And you have one grade level, they need to do that with more intentionality than the other grade levels. So that's where we start to see that gap where 2nd grade would go to a 3rd grade and have a very different experience. And they're trying to have students make sense of how do I take the knowledge from my 2nd grade and apply it to 3rd grade as kids, right? So we need to be doing that in that adoption process. So I feel like the new lost policy kind of spells that out.
Okay.
So that when you're doing an adoption, you never do a grade level standalone, unless it's a unique situation. So for example, high school Spanish, right? It would be Spanish as a world language adoption, not we're teaching Spanish at the elementary world, we're not really teaching Spanish.
So do we need to figure out where do we need to go to the teachers and say where the programs really need to be updated and get input from them so we know where to start, so that we're not trying to do them all at one time because we can't afford to do them all at one time. But we need to go to them and say, does the language arts program need new books and a new curriculum? But we have to go to them because they're the ones who know what should be taught. Are we at that point where we need to say, maybe next year we need to start talking about it so the following year we can pilot and then adopt?
Yeah, we're getting really close. So that's that document that I shared with you that the administrators and some teachers in each building are adding to so that they know what is being taught for reading or writing in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. So it's getting our handle on where we are so that you can see that sense of urgency.
But on that document, I didn't see
where it said, okay, K through 2 is doing this math, and then it flows into 3 through 5 to middle school. I just saw, okay, K through 2 has this, third grade has this, or since we're using math. Is that something else that the administrators in the building can then be asking with these PLCs? Is just, are these things actually flowing, or should we focus more where there's a conjuncture versus picking random curriculums? I mean, is that something we ask the admin and the PLCs that are formed on Friday to, what is their priority? How do they want to do this before we?
Yeah, and that's kind of what that Friday work is start identifying big standards, what are your curriculum and resources that you're using, and then where are we seeing the biggest need, the biggest gap right now in our system.
So they can let us know what areas we need to focus on right away.
I wish I did have a timeline. So it's every Friday, more and more teachers are getting closer to knowing their standards. Like ELA right now, we've talked a lot about the middle school and high school. They have a very good understanding of what they need, where their gaps are. And some of it is not adoption, it's just novel sets, right? There's holes in novel sets. So that's not a whole adoption piece, it's just novel sets with incomplete sets. And so that's a little bit more of a different curriculum resource and not a curriculum adoption. So we're seeing some pieces of those come together.
I've got a question for Laura. When you formed that committee to study the math curriculum, and you had a committee and they looked at, I think, narrowed it down to 3 different texts, and then you worked with them and you came up to Go Math, right?
Yeah.
And was that adopted elementary and middle?
Yes.
K. Okay. And so that gave the continuity from K through 8, and then I think I thought was to find some continuity then in the high school. It's kind of a different animal, but I think that you did that. You did that with your work. And
Well, and really where you start are your standards. Common Core State Standards, or Washington State Standards. That's where you start. And that's where you get your continuity, especially in the ELA or math. It shows you where you build and where your standards are. And then, Susan was a part of some of those selections of the math committee. When we reviewed, OSBI actually has on their site the curriculums that actually do the best job at meeting standards and where they're weak on some standards. And then after you adopt a curriculum, you realize, this piece doesn't really work that much. So therefore, we're not focusing on that. It's not a power standard, so we're going to not do this. We're going to focus more on this area of this book or this area of the curriculum. But you really start with your standards first, and that's really where you get that confidence.
And that's kind of where we're at right now.
We're still focusing on standards.
Some grade levels more than others.
But what made that change come about? What made that? Okay, we've got to revise our math curriculum.
We hadn't had a math book in over 20 years, and it wasn't even. It didn't begin. And Cheryl is here. She kind of pointed to some teachers behind me. They would have really good insight on this. So these 2 young behind me. And Heather worked very hard on the math adoption. Lisa's working really hard on the ELA alignment right now. Cheryl Pacelli worked on the math adoption, but we haven't had any books. We haven't still in ELA or social studies, and some of the language in our social studies books is quite frankly not appropriate anymore. It's what was acceptable language 30 years ago. It's no longer appropriate language to be using anymore. They start with the standards and then those steps.
Okay.
And really what they're doing currently is looking at those standards and creating their own.
So it's coming from the school. Okay. So.
And that's what happened in the math. We didn't have anything, and I said, we need something in middle school, and Gary was like, great, you're leading in K-12. Let's go. And I was like, oh.
But I guess, okay, so we're working on the standards, and we've done it with math. How long ago was the math one?
2 years before COVID hit, and then
So
the year
4
COVID
years.
hit, we were still.
Yeah, we're at a 6-year adoption, correct?
Yes.
We're at a 6-year adoption of the math.
So it takes 6 years to fully adopt, or?
Before we even look at another book, we have to keep with the company for 6 years.
And before you really even see that impact, kids need to be in it, our staff has to be using it, before you really can see the impact of that kid having that for
Staff has to be
several years.
comfortable teaching.
And that's K-8 only, because high school does not adopt when we adopted.
Right.
So they're still looking at the high school math. We met at PLC and we have our essential standards, and then we looked in the book for where they are in our book and which units and modules they are, because they don't always give them. Then we looked at the content. Did it have enough? And like, there was one on expressions, algebraic expressions. They had one lesson in the 7th grade. And so then next to it, I wrote, beef it up, which means you've got to supplement because there wasn't enough info in the book. And I talked to other school districts, and whatever book they adopted, they go, we've got to beef it up. Everybody's in that same, because they haven't made a textbook has enough, they cover everything, but not always the content that we want.
Well, I guess as we go forward with this procedure on curriculum adoption, we really need to have that information. But at the same time, we don't want it to get lost in the shuffle either. Like, we need to start having a timeline of when this is all going down, because I feel like we keep talking about looking at things, but we're not talking about doing things. So.
Right, the thing you don't want to do is if you don't unpack the standards and have identified those big rocks, you don't want to spend 3 years piloting and adopting curriculum at a very expensive ticket if we are not really sure what our standards are going to be. So I think ELA in the middle and the high school are probably the closest next ones.
Probably social studies.
And social studies, because the ELA and social studies are both leading secondary. Middle school.
How do we, because I feel like we had the curriculum adoption policy that was like cobwebbed in the closet and not like a living, meaningful thing. And so, I mean, how do we make this something that's valuable for teachers and some sort of, I mean, I'm not sure how we build that into.
That's my concern with doing this read-through and then adopting it at the next meeting. There's a lot of vague unknowns that we aren't addressing, and we adopt this without it having a timeline. It just allows those vague things, and then it gets shoved back in the closet, and we don't actually go forward with anything.
Right, so you don't have to adopt a policy and procedure, but you do need a policy, and you need a policy that's a WASDA policy.
Well, and I agree with you, but I'm stuck on this fact that we're just
In addition to it, we need to talk to the teachers and find out what really needs to be updated now.
Correct.
And start setting up time so that we can set money aside and say, okay, we're going to do the ELL now.
Yeah, because that's what I
And then we're going to do down the road, we're going to do science or whatever happens to be next. But we need to update.
Yeah.
And it sounds like science in elementary is, they're looking at that.
We're looking at that
Yeah.
too. But we need to set the money aside so that you guys feel free enough that you can select something and pilot it and.
There's a timeline on both sides. Like, my biggest concern would be that the teachers do all this work unpacking the standards and then come to us in July or June and say, okay, we've done your work that you required, now get us this curriculum, and we're like, oh, well, now we need to.
Well,
So if there was a fair timeline of like, okay, you have this time to get us this information, and then we will take this time to get you the money to provide you what you're requesting.
yes, I totally get that. So it's not waiting for everyone all at the same time to unpack standards. So principals are working with teachers and like leaning in and listening. So like, how close are you? Are you ready? What do you need? So we're already having those conversations right now. I think what the worry is do we do a cycle where next year's math, the next year's reading, the next year? I think that's what I'm hearing is, do we have some type of math for that?
Well, just from a financial basis, because if they're doing all that work to unpack it, they need to know what the expectation is from us in return of supporting them is.
That's why we set aside some funding for it, but it's also critical not to just throw money at something that there's no readiness for it.
Which I respect, but I want to respect that they're thinking that when they get to that point, we can say, yes, we have this money set aside, so it would be nice to adopt some sort of timeline.
Yeah, I hear you. I would agree with you on that. That's why we're looking at the policies right now. Because what we have is not working.
Yes, yeah.
That we all.
is, and then we put possible action because we only added one word, and it's property.
It's highlighted.
Yes, okay, so on G, it's forward, sale of real property. That's the only add. 6881. Procedure.
The procedure, okay.
The policy hasn't changed, the procedure is just adding just that section, that's it. And I gave you both to look at, so.
Yeah, we need a second reader. Yeah, we should take action on that one. Yeah.
So I move that we approve 6881 disposal of surplus equipment and/or materials, both with policy and procedure.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Reading in progress.
This one probably is a little bit easier too. So we met on our first read and the comment was to add in the last paragraph, students with excused absence has right to make up this work. And that was the only change to that one. That's suggested by the board.
And this is the second read, so.
So I move that we pass 2420 grading and progress reports.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Personnel under action items.
So we have the official leave of Caitlin for the 22-23 school year, so that was verified. We have 2 resignations, officially Brett Simpson and Darlene Davis, and we have a hire, Brett Simpson for middle school math and elective leave at the middle school.
We approve the personnel. Go through the specific here.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have you heard of Caitlin's had her baby yet?
This morning. Anybody have any word yet tonight? No? She has not made it in the world yet.
Baby was supposed to be born on spring break.
I know. She's waiting for warmer weather.
The snow came and she said, I'm not coming out.
ELA state competition.
Sarah?
Hello everyone, I'm just going to zoom in. It's awfully difficult to have a conversation and present to you while I'm monitoring your webinars at the week. So I'm just going to chat from here if that's okay. So Tony could not be here tonight to request approval to take the FBLA students that have qualified to compete at state to Spokane next week. The state competition is from next Wednesday through Saturday at Davenport Grand in Spokane. We have 6 students competing in a variety of different topics that range from political science to public speaking. It also includes journalism and broadcast journalism. Each student has their own specialty area that they'll be competing in. And so we need to request that he have approval to be able to take the student to Spokane a number of days to compete at state.
I move that we approve the FBLA future business leaders to go to the state competition in Spokane.
A second.
favor?
Aye.
And program building report. We've already did all that.
Yeah.
We've already done that. Let's do it again.
Hey guys. How was your guys' weekend?
Good. Except for the weather.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got going up at Swiftwater, we have our plant sale in the making so far. We have our peppers sprouted, and we have everyone plant tomatoes today. I'm planning to have that happen for the week. And then we also had the Kid Test Youth Awards, not last week, but the week before on Monday. Yeah, it was cute. And we had multiple people nominated, and everyone who was nominated for Swiftwater ended up winning.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so we had Hunter, who got an award in personal achievement. Kayla got community service. I won an award for leadership. And then we got nominated for our small group for our Global Club for World Community.
Excellent.
It was nice to attend in person because I've gone the last 2 years virtual, so it was nice to see everyone's faces. And then the Thursday, I can't remember, but we went snowshoeing. That was a lot of fun. I went with Michelle and Martha. And it was a lot of fun. It was nice to get outside and there's snow and go on games. And I thought I was going to not enjoy it at all, honestly. But and we also have exhibitions coming up soon. So that'll be exciting to see what our students have been doing, what they've learned, what they're going to learn, what they haven't learned. We also have 2 new students that were both previously homeschooled and they're also new to the area. It's Elizabeth and Jessica. Super excited to have them.
What grades are they?
I am not 100% sure. Yeah, I'm super excited. It's nice to have some new faces.
And graduation's coming up June 14th.
Yes, it is.
That includes you.
Yes. It's exciting. I feel like just spring break is just going to come barreling down on me like,
Is it going to be at the senior center again, or do you know where?
Yes. Voice reasons, but.
The invite came out today.
Yeah.
Do you have any more board comments before we adjourn into executive session? Now we adjourn and move into executive session.